Mexico's Supreme Court ruled that another state law on abortion was unconstitutional, following Tuesday's landmark ruling. Far-right Brazilian President Jair Bolsonaro has softened his tone in the face of widespread criticism over his latest attacks on the country's top institutions. The United Nations Secretary General has called for dialogue with the Taliban as the UN warns of a major economic crisis in the international community abandons Afghanistan. From the headquarters of Telesur English in Havana, Cuba, this is From the South. I'm your host, Gladys Quesada, and now we begin with the news. Mexico's Supreme Court on Thursday ruled that another state law on abortion was unconstitutional, following Tuesday's landmark ruling that penalizing abortion is unconstitutional. In another victory for women's rights campaigners, the court ruled that the penal code of the northern state of Sinaloa, defining life as beginning at conception and equating abortion with murder, was unconstitutional. The unanimous decision will also affect other states with similar laws. After Mexico City decriminalized abortion in the first 12 weeks of pregnancy in 2007, at least 10 of the country's 32 states passed laws obliging the authorities to protect life from the moment of conception. Up to now, abortion has been legal in just 4 states of the country in the first 12 weeks, while elsewhere it was only permitted in the cases of rape, with women facing prosecution for undergoing the procedure.
It is not to any local legislator or this plenary to establish the origin of human life, especially in the absence of scientific consensus.
And we remain on the matter. The United States Justice Department has filed a lawsuit against the state of Texas, arguing that its new abortion law was enacted in open defiance of the Constitution. The law, which is the most restrictive in the country, has sparked international condemnation. The Justice Department is seeking a judgment declaring the Texas abortion ban invalid, as well as a preliminary and permanent injunction against the state of Texas. The law, which bans abortions from the time a heartbeat can be detected, which is usually around 6 weeks and before most women know they are pregnant, does not provide exceptions for cases of rape or incest. It also means that private citizens can bring private litigation against clinics and anyone else who assists a woman in obtaining an abortion after 6 weeks. Experts know the Texas law was designed specifically with the goal of making it more difficult for clinics to obtain federal court orders blocking its enforcement.
The act is clearly unconstitutional under long-standing Supreme Court precedent. Those precedents hold, in the words of Planned Parenthood versus Casey, that, quote, regardless of whether exceptions are made for particular circumstances, a state may not prohibit any woman from making the ultimate decision to terminate her pregnancy before viability. The Department of Justice has a duty to defend the Constitution of the United States and to uphold the rule of law. Today, we fulfill that duty by filing the lawsuit I have just described.
On Thursday, the United States and Mexico resumed high-level trade talks for the first time in 4 years. The talks, halted during the Trump era, seek to cover various subjects, including climate change, workers' rights, and the ongoing immigration issue. The negotiations, referred to as the High-Level Economic Dialogue Talks, were launched by Joe Biden in 2013 when he was vice president under Barack Obama. Current Vice President Kamala Harris opened Thursday's meeting with brief remarks in which she sought to emphasize the Biden administration's desire for warmer relations, referring to the Mexican delegation as our friends, our partners, and stressing that Mexico's economic stability is in the interest of the United States. For his part, before the meeting, Mexican President Andrés Manuel López Obrador said his advisors will press the Biden administration to offer temporary work visas to Central Americans, as a move the Mexican government says could help slow the flow of asylum seekers attempting to travel to the United States and help alleviate a U.S. labor shortage. And now we address other topics. In Mexico, the government announced it will allocate over $123 million to support the victims of Hurricane Grace. Authorities announced that the funds will benefit more than 110,000 citizens in the three hardest hit states of the country. Welfare Secretary Javier May specified that the funds will be used to repair damaged homes and recover flooded farmland across 150 municipalities in the central and southeastern parts of the country. Nearly 800 people have been evacuated from their homes in southwestern Spain as firefighting teams and planes fight a wildfire, which has killed one firefighter. The blaze in the mountain range of Malaga province started late on Wednesday and grew overnight, prompting the first evacuations near the resort town of Estepona. Around 250 firefighters were working to extinguish the fire on the ground, helped by 29 planes and helicopters, authorities said. Unusually large wildfires have raged in various parts of the world this year, fueled by extremely hot, dry conditions that experts say are symptomatic of climate change. We'll be right back after this very short break, so don't go away. Welcome back to From the South. In a move indicating his increasing political isolation in the face of the latest attacks on the country's top institutions, far-right Brazilian President Jair Bolsonaro softened his tone in a statement issued on Thursday. Following the statement, which came 2 days after marches that saw his supporters attempt to intimidate judges of the Supreme Court, Bolsonaro supporting truck drivers lifted roadblocks they had mounted in at least 15 states of the country. Tuesday protests were a show of force by Bolsonaro in the face of the falling popularity and as part of his long-running attacks on 2 Supreme Court judges who initiated investigations against him, as well as directing their anger at the Supreme Court and Congress, which has rejected Bolsonaro's attacks on the country's electoral system. The president's supporters also attacked journalists and tried to force their way into the Ministry of Health. Backtracking on his previous incitement to act, Bolsonaro said his comments had been in the heat of the moment and stated that it was his duty as president to come out publicly and say that he had never had any intention of attacking any of the branches of government. And we continue in Brazil. The Federal Supreme Court continues to study the case on the demarcation of indigenous lands, while one justice has already voted against the argument presented and in favor of indigenous rights. Minister of the Court, Justice Edson Fachin, voted against the application of the time frame argument for the demarcation of indigenous lands in the country. Fachin argued that indigenous property is not equal to civil property and should not be considered from this perspective, but rather based on the Constitution, which recognizes indigenous lands' rights. The other judges of the court are still to vote on the case next Wednesday. Meanwhile, more than 5,000 women representing 150 indigenous communities who have camped out in the capital Brasilia, close to the Supreme Court, to demand the competent authorities to reject the case that could put an end to the demarcation of their ancestral lands in favor of agribusiness, mining and logging interests, celebrated the rejection of the time frame argument by one of the judges. Plans to march through the city were suspended on Thursday due to the ongoing presence of Bolsonaro supporters, spurred on by the president with fears of attacks. The protests of recent days have seen a large deployment of police officers in front of the Supreme Federal Court, as well as around the Congress. Broad sectors in Ecuador have rejected the government's latest economic policy announcements. From the capital, Quito, our correspondent, Denise Herrera, has the details.
The economic situation in Ecuador is one of the central issues for the government of Guillermo Lasso. Recently, it was announced that tax reforms will be sent, something that worries Ecuadorians.
The pandemic has been very hard for us, and we are still going through it. My son is currently unemployed and has 2 children to support. It is very hard.
The situation is starting to improve because they already know you, so people are coming and starting to see work, but it is lacking.
Several benches have expressed their rejection of the government's announcements. However, in the last few days, the single report for debate of the pre-form to the 2021 budget was approved without being reviewed beforehand.
From the Commission, we have noticed the blockade by the Assembly members of the ruling party. They are always trying to crash the sessions, and we have pointed it out in the meetings. We have therefore suggested separating the political differences for the good of the Commission.
The government also confirmed a new agreement with the IMF for 800 million, with the aim of reducing the fiscal deficit and becoming less dependent on oil.
The President of the Republic has announced that the new agreement with the fund will follow the line of contracting and reducing public spending, and this can be done by laying off workers and reducing the budget for social works, education, and health. The elimination of the inheritance tax has also been mentioned, and this will benefit the wealthiest sectors of the country.
The government's announcements have also been rejected by different sectors. Student, workers, and farmers' unions have initiated a series of actions to make the government comply with its campaign proposals.
Thank you, Denise, for this report. Now we continue. In Argentina, the campaigns for the primaries to be held this Sunday have closed, ahead of the midterm elections in November. President Alberto Fernandez and Vice President Cristina Fernandez spoke at the closing event of the ruling Front for All campaign in Buenos Aires on Wednesday, stressing that there are two competing models for the country at stake and calling on Argentines to vote. Sunday's primaries will determine the candidates to stand in the November legislative elections, which will see 127 of the 257 seats in the Chamber of Deputies and 24 of the 72 seats in the Senate renewed. 34 million citizens are registered to vote. Cuban authorities continue the national campaign to vaccinate all children from the age of 2 upwards against COVID-19 in a world first. The Caribbean nation has committed to vaccinating over 90% of its population by the end of November. According to the vaccination plan, children aged 12 and older are the first to receive the domestically produced shots. More than 15 million doses have already been administered to the adult population, and more than 4.6 million Cubans are fully vaccinated, representing just over 40% of the population. Schools have mostly been closed since March 2020, and students have been following lessons on television. The school year restarted on Monday, but students will continue learning remotely until all eligible children are vaccinated.
The vaccine arrives here first thing in the morning, in its transport. Everything is guaranteed. Each vaccination point has its cellar, its thermos, with its minimum conditions to preserve the refrigeration line.
The World Health Organization's Director for Africa reported that the continent saw a 23% fall in coronavirus cases last week, but also noted that Africa's COVID death toll now stops 200,000.
The third wave in Africa has taken a downward slide with a 23%, so almost a quarter decrease in new cases last week, driven largely by countries in Northern and Southern Africa. That's the steepest drop in 8 weeks since the peak in July. This progress also comes with a stark reminder of the heavy toll COVID-19 has taken as we pass the sad milestone of 200,000 lives lost to the virus on the continent.
The WHO regional director also explained that Africa is set to get 25% less vaccine doses than anticipated by the end of the year, while richer nations simply throw them away.
On the vaccine front, in the past week, the COVAX facility has delivered over 5 million doses to African countries. I was saddened to read that 3 times as many doses have been thrown away in the United States alone, 15 million doses since March 2021. This is enough vaccines to cover everyone over 18 years in Liberia, Mauritania, and the Gambia, for example. Every dose is precious and has the potential to save a life. High-income countries have pledged to share 1 billion doses globally, and so far, 120 million doses have been released.
And we have more stories coming up after this final short break, so stay with us. Welcome back. United Nations Secretary General Antonio Guterres has insisted that the international community maintain a dialogue with the Taliban in Afghanistan in order to avoid a deterioration of the situation in the country, warning that an economic collapse will be possible, millions die, and must be avoided. The call comes as Western powers and neighboring nations work to establish what their relationship will be with the Taliban.
We do not want Afghanistan to be the center of terrorism. If we do not want women and girls to lose all the rights they acquired during the previous period, if we want different ethnic groups to feel represented, of course, we must maintain a dialogue with the Taliban, a dialogue with principles.
And in the same spirit, the United Nations has urged the world to keep money flowing into Afghanistan, despite concerns over the Taliban government, warning the already poor country could otherwise suffer a historic breakdown. UN envoy Deborah Lyons warns that the new Afghan authorities cannot pay salaries and voice alarm over a storm of crisis, including a plunging currency, sharply rising food and fuel prices, and a lack of cash at private banks. The UN Development Programme said that Afghanistan is already one of the world's poorest nations, with 72% of the population living on a no more than $1 a day. Unsurprisingly, 20 years of foreign intervention and war have done nothing to improve the lives of Afghans. A commercial flight from the Afghan capital carrying some 200 passengers landed in Qatar on Thursday, the first evacuation flight of foreigners after the chaotic U.S. withdrawal from Afghanistan. Qatar, which hosts a major U.S. airbase, continues to play a leading role in the efforts by Western powers to negotiate with the Taliban. Acting as the central intermediary between the Taliban and the international community in recent years, numerous countries, including the United States, have relocated their embassies from Kabul to Doha in the aftermath of the Taliban takeover. The Taliban have said they will not prevent anyone who wishes to from leaving the country, but also urge skilled Afghans, such as doctors and engineers, to remain. This Thursday saw the 13th BRICS summit held in virtual format and chaired by Indian Prime Minister Narendra Modi. With the theme Intra-BRICS Cooperation for Continuity, Consolidation and Consensus, the summit gathered the leaders of 5 of the largest developing countries of the world: the presidents of Brazil, Jair Bolsonaro, South Africa, Cyril Ramaphosa, Russia, Vladimir Putin, and China, Xi Jinping, and the host. As part of the discussions, President Putin raised the issue of Afghanistan, noting that the withdrawal of U.S. forces and its allies has led to a new crisis, and called for BRICS countries to pay special attention to the situation. Without naming any country in particular, the Five Nations group also say they reject the double standards in countering terrorism and extremism conducive to terrorism. The leaders also exchange views on the impact of the COVID-19 pandemic and other current global and regional issues. Russia and Belarus started the Zapad 2021 military exercises on Thursday as the two nations continue to strengthen their political and security ties. The exercises will involve up to 200,000 troops, which will make them among the largest in history. The drill, held every 4 years, comes in the context of a tense situation in the region, as neighboring nations, Poland and the Baltic states, follow their Western allies in attacking both Belarus and Russia. The reaction has been to exaggerate the supposed threat posed by the drills, alongside NATO and the EU. Russian President Vladimir Putin and his Belarusian counterpart Alexander Lukashenko met in Moscow on Thursday. At a press conference, they announced they had agreed on a range of economic policies aimed at integrating the two former Soviet countries. The two leaders said they had agreed on 28 programs unifying their economies.
The past several years, energetic work has been carried out on a package of documents to further deepen the integration processes between Russia and Belarus. We are talking about 28 so-called union programs, which are aimed at unifying the legislation of Russia and Belarus in various areas of the economy. Today, I would like to note with satisfaction that all 28 programs have been agreed. The President of Russia didn't mention the reasoning that someone would swallow someone. The President of Russia and myself did not get that disease. If someone is feeling ill, we can help them to heal.
And we have come to the end of this news brief. But remember, you can find this and many other stories on our website at telesurenglish.net. And also, if you feel so inclined, please join us on social media. We are on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram and Telegram. For Telesur English, I'm Gladys Quesada. Thank you for watching.